objective in general. We'll go into an overview of the history of the Havana International Fair, which Ms. Grell, who is our moderator, will be presenting on. We'll speak a bit about preparing for the trade show. Ms. Pearl Joseph will present on that. Then we'll look at the perspective and lessons to be learned from the FIHAV and doing business in Cuba, the challenges and opportunities. We hope to have a presentation from TIPA, from Ms. Andrina Simon on this. Also, we will have a presentation on the lessons learned from participating in the FIHAV and doing business in Cuba from Mr. Ramjatan, the CEO of Baron Foods. Then we will have a presentation from the Cuban ambassador, His Excellency Juan Carlos Formenta de la Rosa, on logistics, transport, and other trade issues to consider when attending the FIHAV. Then we will go into some questions and answers. We'll have a question and answer discussion segment. And then we will wrap up with myself. Sorry, I missed a presentation, the snapshot of CARICOM Cuba Trade Agreement, which will be presented by my colleague, Dolores Francis, Program Officer at the Trade Policy Unit. Okay, so just to give an overview of what it is we are doing and what the objective is. So the OECS this year is making a very concerted effort to have participation. Sorry, let me just remind you, please, to mute your mics. The OECS is making a very strategic initiative to not only participate in the FIHAV, but to actually establish in a more real way trading relations with Cuba. By trade, we do not only mean in one direction per se, but trade with the expectation of having reciprocal trade. While we have a Cuba CARICOM agreement that has existed for some time, the trade from the OECS into Cuba has not really been that significant. Most of the trade really has taken place from some of the larger territories like Trinidad and Jamaica. Our approach is to really make a serious presence at the FIHAV 2016. The expectation is that the FIHAV 2016 will lay first the platform for really getting into the Cuban market, for displaying our goods and services at the Cuban market, but beyond that, to actually establish real relationships with distributors in the market and to have a market presence. We must appreciate, however, that there are many challenges to achieving this objective and to achieving this goal. In getting to this stage, we had to do several things. There was a pre-mission, a 2015 mission, and we have had several interactions before and dialogue with the on the Cuban side, with our ambassadors and at the level of the OECS to try and build the relationships in Cuba in terms of trade. What we are doing, the expectation is that the follow-up to the FIHAV, we will see a mission to Cuba, which would be at a higher level, and that will give us the opportunity to work out some of the challenges that we know exist in the market, for example, with the issues of transport and logistics, and actually getting distribution in the market. But we must take the first steps, and this is part of the process. One is to orient OECS nationals and OECS companies in doing business in Cuba. And this webinar is very critical to that. It will provide a lot of information on how to do business in Cuba and how to actually get into the FIHAV and how to participate in the trade show, how to maximize the opportunity there. We anticipate that it will extend beyond the companies that are participating in FIHAB, and that the information will be very useful generally to OECS companies that want to do business in Cuba. We are very happy to have with us the CEO of Baron Foods, who has had some success in the market and penetrating the market and actually doing business in Cuba through tremendous effort. We will learn from this experience today, and we hope that that will help us to be able to move forward with our initiative. We are also very happy to have the Cuban ambassador with us, who will share from that end some of the strategies that can be used to build stronger relationships and deepen our integration in terms of the Cuban market and doing business in Cuba. So, welcome everyone. Thank you very much for your presence. We look forward to the next couple hours of interesting dialogue and discussion and learning and sharing. What I would like to do before we just get into it, we would just do a sort of roll call just to see where we have participants. So if we can begin, yes. Okay, so let's begin, let's go by alphabetical order. Do we have Antigua, a presence in the room? Is Antigua there? Antigua hearing us?
Hi, morning. This is Sushil of Henderson from Antigua.
Okay, thank you, welcome.
Yep.
Okay, next we go to Dominica.
Can you hear me, sir?
Yes, we can. Hi, good morning, yes, we're hearing you.
Okay, morning, that's Lillian Piper with the GLAM. I'm outside of the participants going to Cuba, but I'm sitting in the meeting.
Okay, thank you. Welcome.
Morning, Ambassador.
Good morning. Okay. Do we have Grenada?
Yes, we have Grenada, the Grenada Cooperative Nutmeg Association.
Okay, good, welcome.
Thanks.
Okay. Do we have St. Kitts?
Yes, we have St. Kitts.
Okay, do we have two participants from St. Kitts?
Yes, we do. Ministry of International Trade, St. Kitts.
Okay, good morning, welcome.
Morning.
And our other St. Kitts colleagues from St. Kitts.
We have the St. Kitts Nevis Chamber of Industry and Commerce. Good morning.
Okay, good morning, welcome. St. Lucia, we have St. Lucia on.
Hi, good morning. Carlos Sido here from NatDev Limited.
Okay, good morning, welcome.
Morning.
Do you have any other representation from St. Lucia?
Absolutely. Cathilda Charles Johnny, Harris Paint St. Lucia Limited.
Okay, good morning, welcome. Happy to have you on. Okay. Going to St. Vincent.
Yes, good morning. We have representatives from the Ministry of Trade and also from ECG, one of the companies that will be participating, and ECMID.
Okay. Good morning. Welcome. Okay. We have our TPU. Is the OECS commissioner? The cash. Okay. Just, we will just give you the yourselves.
Virginia Paul. Dolores Francis, Trade Policy.
Cupid Communications.
Yeah.
Okay. Good morning. Welcome.
When I want to speak, what I do.
Okay. Good morning, Mr. Ramjatan, CEO of Baron Foods.
Hi, good morning. Ronald Ramjatan here.
Morning. Welcome, Mr. Ramjatan.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. what we'll do now, yes, we will just go into the presentation. So my colleague, Darren Grell, will be the moderator and will take charge of the session from now.
Okay, good morning, everyone. Kwesi already did the welcome remarks. What I'm going to show you now is a video commissioned by the OECS CBU from Sanford Bell. She was consulted to do this video on behalf of the CBU about Cuba. So I'm going to show a YouTube video.
As U.S. President Barack Obama wrapped up his historic three-day visit to Havana, Cubans were debating the longevity of his efforts towards normalizing U.S.-Cuba relations. But on Monday, at an unprecedented joint press conference by both Presidents Obama and Castro, the U.S. President was confident that the U.S.-Cuba restoration process initiated December 17, 2014 would continue beyond his remaining 9 months in the White House.
I can't be entirely sure, but I believe it will end. And the path that we're on will continue beyond my administration. The reason is why. The reason is that what we did for 50 years did not serve our interests or the interests of Cuba.
The main sticking point for U.S.-Cuba bilateral relations is the economic blockade. The trade embargo imposed on Cuba in 1962. The Caribbean region has historically and consistently shown Cuban solidarity by calling for the removal of all sanctions against Cuba. Now, as U.S.-Cuba relations warm up, speculation is rife about Cuba's future relations with its Caribbean allies.
I don't think that it is Cuban government's policy to affect their geopolitical or economic interests with Caribbean or the Caribbean countries. They will be looking further south. They will be looking at the Caribbean as their Caribbean island, a Caribbean nation. I have been here for 15 years. They have always said that to me. This has been stated many times in meetings, and they would be moving towards integrating the Caribbean even more as a consequence of this.
President Obama is the second United States president to visit Cuba. The first was in 1928, 88 years ago. First Lady Michelle Obama and daughters Sasha and Malia accompanied President Obama on this history-making trip. President Obama's delegation of more than 40 included United States congressional members, Secretary of Commerce Penny Pritzker, and his Secretary of State, John Kerry. With the economic blockade on Cuba still in force, President Obama has said adjustments to the embargo have been made to facilitate some trade and commerce between the two countries. Cuba's President Raul Castro calls these steps positive, but inefficient, and called anew for the full removal of the economic blockade.
Hey, brother, come forward. All right. Yes, sir. Look like you're engaged, man. Man, I can't be too engaged today. Investment unit, man. You look like you should be entering from this way. Well, you know, things get changed around. I tell you, I think I'm going to direct, well, not my business.
Also looking at tourism.
Jude Carrasquero
of the Tobago Trade Facilitation Office in Havana.
What are you directing? What?
5 million tourists.
This.
And I think that we need to tap into it.
What's things, huh?
On the ground in Havana.
I went to your document. it something that you're just doing on your own, or is it something that the governors? I was instructed by being to put together something. So I basically look up. Well, let me tell you, the genesis of this is
Please mute your microphone, St. George's.
responsible for good competitiveness and this kind of thing. No, a Zoom meeting they have with the OECS talking about going to Cuba for trading.
That's St. Kitts. We can hear your whole conversation. Please mute your microphone.
Yeah, that's Cuba. So what happened is that payments and they didn't have any funds. They were saying, oh, Governor saying you want to have a great symposium.
Companies are a really serious trade with Cuba. Though the process for registering companies in Cuba is tedious and bureaucratic, the Caribbean process here in Havana affirms there's a lot more room for many more Caribbean citizens to step into this Cuban market of 11.3 million people and seize burgeoning business opportunities. But the Caribbean approach to doing business in Cuba must be strategic and collective. Entrepreneurs should contact their resident Cuban ambassadors to register their interest and visit Cuba to explore the market.
And I think that we need to tap into it in a very strategic way, you know, at the mega political level and also at the practical level in terms of the facilitation of the trade at the base level. So we can getting our service providers, getting our manufacturers, and then we will leave our politicians to deal with things from the policy standpoint at the higher level. You know, there's a Cuba CARICOM agreement, as I pointed out earlier on, and I think that the agreement we need to work a lot more, you know, as a community. For the first time, we will be participating in the International Havana Fair in November as one Caribbean. That means we'll have one Caribbean pavilion. It's a strategic approach, something that I have initiated and have promoted with the Cuban government. And this year, for the first time, we take a cluster approach to trade fair participation in Cuba.
In Havana, Cuba, Udell Santa Bell reporting.
Okay, I'm going to load the PowerPoint now, which will guide the rest of the presentation. Okay, Dolores, you can go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. Can we have the screen share?
Yep.
Good morning, delegates and member states across the OECS region. This presentation would pick up from the video which was just shared, in which we would have heard that there are many instruments under which CARICOM can advance trade with Cuba. So this presentation would seek to create awareness, sensitization, and appreciation of how the CARICOM-Cuba Trade and Economic Cooperation Agreement promotes trade and seeks to advance economic cooperation between CARICOM and Cuba. You will receive a brief factual set of information about the agreement, which will be covered under the overview. A summary will then be provided of the main provisions that define the agreement. A synopsis of the goods that receive duty-free treatment under the agreement will be provided, and then a snapshot of the products that have historically been traded will be shared. Finally, a brief reflection of the development and status of negotiations of the agreement will be provided. In respect of the factual details, this will establish the background and the context for this presentation. Cuba and the CARICOM territories, as members of the Association of Caribbean States, found common ground on the importance of promoting expanded economic space for regional trade, investment, and integration. The convention that established the Association of Caribbean States, the OECS, was signed in July 1994 and signaled the platform for regional cooperation and ultimately the establishment of the Trade and Economic Cooperation Agreement. This agreement was signed on the 5th of July 2000 with the overall objective strengthening commercial and economic relations between the Republic of Cuba and CARICOM territories. The understanding enshrined under this agreement was that it would come into force or take effect when all the territories or parties signatory to the agreement had ratified it. However, since this process had not been completed at the time of signature, the agreement would have been provisionally applied and to date is still pending full entry into force. At the date of signing of the agreement, comprehensive and complete negotiations on all areas of trade and economic cooperation interests were not final, which classified the agreement therefore as a partial scope agreement, and to date, the agreement still remains a partial scope agreement pending further negotiations for the inclusion of other areas such as services, tourism, transportation, issues which are outlined in the agreement. An important commitment under the agreement that emanated really from the historical ties between Cuba and CARICOM was that to ensure meaningful economic and social benefits are realized from the operation of the agreement, and that disparities based on capacity and level of economic development are recognized and minimized, the agreement provided that the lesser developed countries of CARICOM, which would include OECS member states and Belize, would not be required to grant duty-free preferential access to goods emanating from Cuba. Hence, the agreement would thus have provided for special treatment of the LDCs. As indicated earlier, the agreement remains a partial scope agreement, and therefore future negotiations for the establishment of a free trade agreement remains outstanding. In respect of the main provisions of the agreement, a simple visualization is presented that will provide the basis on which to understand the key obligations, the commitments, and the issues which the agreement seeks to address. The chapeau, for persons who would have some level of familiarity with the agreement, the chapeau, which is to be found at the very beginning of the agreement, establishes the guiding principles under which the agreement will operate. For instance, on review of the agreement and looking at the very beginning of it, one would note that the principles established are founded in the following: to promote an expanded economic space for trade and investment, and to foster economic integration. And that would include liberalizing relations in trade, investment, and to also explore cooperation in areas of transportation and other related areas. The chapeau also speaks to improving living standards and encouraging the progressive development of the economies of Cuba and the CARICOM territories. The chapeau of the agreement also recognizes the different levels of economic development between CARICOM and Cuba, formulating clear and accurate guidelines that will recognize the need for increased involvement of the business entities in the development of CARICOM and Cuba. In respect of the provisions on previous slide, please. In respect of the provisions dealing with the interpretation of the agreement. Madam Moderator, the previous slide holds. The provisions with respect to the interpretation of the agreement are simple and simply establishes the rules for interpretation and also provides definitional concepts. The objectives would outline the means by which the broader goals for strengthening commercial and economic relations will be achieved. So on examination, one will notice the program or work program of actions that are established and which are defined under the objectives that would indicate how Cuba and CARICOM territories intend to strengthen their commercial and economic relations. In respect of institutional issues and dispute settlement, which are standard features of any trade agreement, these provisions explain how the agreement will be governed so that the functions essentially of the Joint Commission are outlined, the rules of procedure for settling disputes are outlined, and also indicates what would happen in instances where there are disputes. And the issues covered here would be in respect of the interpretation of the agreement that would have led to the disputes, the application, execution, and non-compliance, and how those would be treated. In respect of the provisions on market access, these obligations are outlined under Article 5, and this would be of interest to this meeting because this is the aspect of the trade agreement that has really entered into full force and under which trade is occurring between Cuba and CARICOM territories. Article 5 therefore provides the provisions for gradual liberalization. Article 5 defines and categorizes the goods that will be subject to duty-free treatment and also gives a schedule of tariff reduction. Example, on examination of Article 5, businesses with an interest in trading with Cuba would have a clear idea of the goods which benefit from immediate preferential access so that there are no duties, the goods which are faced with the goods which have a phase reduction of duties, and also will have an appreciation of a list of agricultural products which may not be granted duty-free access at certain times of the year. So Article 5 really gives that appreciation, awareness, and sensitization of what is allowed in terms of trade in goods between CARICOM and Cuba. The trade in goods under the agreement is also governed by Article 6, which looks at the treatment of goods produced in a free zone. Article 7, which really speaks to the rules of origin and would explain the qualifying criteria for goods to enter into the Cuban and CARICOM markets and to benefit from duty-free treatment. And Article 8 and 9, which speak to technical standards and exemptions respectively. So that would form the regime that defines how we trade with Cuba when it comes to the full list of goods. In respect of trading services, this area has not yet been negotiated. However, the intention for a work program to discuss expanding trading services is defined in Article 15 of the agreement, and therefore services providers may have an interest in looking at that particular article to have a sense of appreciation of the initial areas which have been outlined for future negotiations. Some of these areas briefly include tourism and travel-related services, entertainment, financial services, professional services, construction and related engineering services, transport, telecommunication services, amongst others. So in terms of future negotiations, these are the initial priority sectors, and our services sectors, in terms of priority sectors of interest to the OECS, are covered. Other issues related to trade financing business facilitation and trade promotion are covered under Articles 14, Articles 13, and Articles 12. Essentially, the business entities with an interest in trading with Cuba will appreciate that these articles provide for the participation of the private sector in establishing a facilitatory business environment. So an examination of those articles, the business sector, OECS member states, ministries of trade, would fully appreciate and be more familiar with the provisions for how facilitation of business between Cuba and CARICOM can occur, and also in terms of the article on trade promotion, it speaks clearly to interventions between CARICOM and Cuba, and the FIHAB is a very good example of a trade promotion activity. The agreement also provides for areas of economic cooperation, and this is defined in Article 10. It recognizes, based on the principles that I spoke to earlier, this article seeks to promote economic and social cooperation that is mutually beneficial, that will support economic integration as well as economic and social development, both in Cuba and in CARICOM. In fact, in 2001, at the conclusion of the CARICOM-Cuba Summit, 2011, my apologies, Cuba had presented to CARICOM 9 projects that would define an economic cooperation agreement. And these projects covered both regional and national projects. They included sectors such as banana and sugar industries, the fishing sector, technical assistance to assist infrastructural development on airports and highways. However, since the presentation of those projects by Cuba in 2011, it is noteworthy that much progress has not been achieved in terms of advancing these areas of economic cooperation. But it does in fact show the strength of the agreement in supporting economic and social development in our region. Finally, the safeguard mechanism, which is also a standard feature of trade agreements, actually recognizes that there are instances when an upsurge in imports may affect the economy of a member state, and therefore provides for temporary suspension of the tariff preferences that have been agreed to under the agreement. So essentially, this capsule presentation seeks to, in terms of the main provisions of the agreement, seeks to give you a synopsis of what the main provisions are and some of the critical areas that we would need to pay attention to in terms of advancing our relations with Cuba post the FIHAB. Earlier, I spoke to market access. The next slide really gives an indication of the annexes that one would find in the agreement. And these annexes, 5 of them, basically details the list of goods that were negotiated and that were agreed to for duty-free preferential access and phase reduction of the most favored nation tariffs. And so that member states who would have an interest, for instance, in knowing which goods would qualify and whether any of their products would qualify for duty-free treatment under this instrument would review, in our instance, Annex 1 and Annex 3. The next slide is mainly for information, just to give an area view of the products that have been traded under the agreement between CARICOM member states and Cuba. And the same would apply for the slide following. The two slides basically also would capture the specific products under the various annexes which I spoke to earlier, and gives a clear indication of some of the products that are being traded under these various annexes. In respect of the developments since the signing of the agreement, this slide is to share with you the negotiations that have taken place between CARICOM and Cuba from 2002 to 2006. And based on the information and appreciation of the process, is that CARICOM and Cuba have really been focused on trading goods and discussions that would have facilitated expansion of the various lists of the goods that are being traded between them. So for instance, one would note that in 2006, there were negotiations that would have expanded the original annexes. And those slides are provided for information of member states in terms of an understanding of the processes. In 2013 also, the information there highlights that a meeting was convened to really look at the ratification and implementation status of the agreement, to review market access difficulties that were impacting on trade between Cuba and CARICOM, and also to look at topics of interest for future negotiations. And therefore, the final slide would summarize the status of implementation. Since 2013, the 8th meeting of the CARICOM-Cuba Joint Commission meeting was convened, and that meeting also expanded on previous discussions regarding issues impacting the effective implementation of the agreement, issues impacting trade between CARICOM and Cuba. The 9th meeting of the CARICOM-Cuba Joint Commission would have examined similar issues, but also would have examined areas for future negotiation, and discussions on trading services would have occurred, and a work program to establish technical working groups to advance discussions on business facilitation and on the greater involvement of the private sector were also covered under the 9th meeting of the CARICOM-Cuba Joint Commission. Finally, the priority areas for implementation and the exchange of export services portfolios remain outstanding, and this is where discussions under the 10th CARICOM-Cuba Joint Commission meeting will be focused. And if you notice, the wheels in motion would signal that the outcomes of the 8th meeting, the 9th meeting, and those outstanding issues are what we as the OECS member state and the OECS region need to push on, and we need to be proactive in having CARICOM advance negotiations with Cuba so that this instrument can really effectively work in our benefit. I thank you.
Thank you, Dolores. We will now move on to an overview of FIHAV. For those of you who have not been and it's your first time hearing it, we'll provide a summary of what FIHAV is and what you can expect. FIHAV is one of the only and best ways to get into the Cuban market. It stands for Feria Internacional de La Habana, which is like the International Fair of Havana. It has been in existence for 33 years. So this is the 33rd edition, and it's going to be held from October 31st to November 4th. at a location in Expo Cuba, a big fairground. There could be hundreds and hundreds of booths there. As you can see from the slide, it has 20,000 square meters of exhibition space and 60 countries from around the world with 4,500 exhibitors take part in FIHAV every year. The trading partners come from as far as, let's say, everybody else except the US, although they're still there, right, Ambassador? Oh, yeah, they are, because Cuba trades with the US in agriculture and some other goods as well. So even the US is there, and that's one of the best ways to get into Cuba. The graphic to the right shows you the things that are exhibited at FIHAV: raw materials or inputs to production, foodstuff, textiles, other consumer goods, machinery, equipment, technology, and other services. These are the things that you can find in a big summary as a group that's exhibited at FIHAV. Businesses that are what you call the best place to do business at FIHAV, because you have the representatives from the Cuban economy as well, the Chambers of Commerce, the Ministry of External Affairs, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. All the companies, all the big buyers, like there's one called CMEX, they are also there so that they can find out what you have to bring into the market. But you as a manufacturer or service provider can go in to see what you can also receive from the Cuban market. So it's not basically what they can import into Cuba, but what you can also export from Cuba. So it's very beneficial to all concerned to take part in FIHAV, as that will be your entry point into the Cuban market. These are the top 5 reasons. There could be many more for you to attend FIHAV. Effectively, you're publicizing your company. You're giving your company that nod it needs to what you can provide to the Cubans. So that provides effective publicity to go in and let the companies know what you are offering them. It's a proven entry strategy. In my research for this webinar, a lot of testimonials out there for people who have to enter the Cuban market. It's a must that they go into the Cuban market through the FIHAV. It's your first step in. And I think Mr. Ramjatan will provide a more detailed experience of when he presents his presentation. If you're already in Cuba, it's going to provide that growth, that potential that you need. So every year it could be different. Every year you could go in and meet different companies. So it provides significant growth potential for your companies if you're already established in Cuba. From the video you heard that Jude Carrasquero said about Sasha Cosmetics and Angostura. Those are companies that are already entering from the regional market. The Jamaicans are also in there with various products as well. It improves market potential. So you get into the market and you know that Cuba has 11 million people. So if you can get into that market and supply the Cubans, even if it's just a start, you know that there's a big market out there to exploit. And it has proven results. Again, from doing research into this webinar, companies have said that was their stepping stone into the Cuban market. So these are the top 5 reasons that I found why people use FIHAV to enter the Cuban market. To prepare for a trade show, I'm going to invite Mrs. Pearl Joseph to kind of give you a background on how people enter the market, why attend a trade show.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Pearl Joseph, and I've been with the OECS Competitive Business Unit for the past 17 years, primarily assisting the business development officers with all of their activities, and that included attendance at trade shows and trade events and preparing for such events. In my experience as preparing for a trade event, there are a few things that we have learned over the past years here at the CBU. The first area we normally look at is the display, your stand display. And we always encourage persons that there should be no clutter. For example, no half-drunk cups of coffee, newspapers, or empty bottles of water near the stand areas. Or normally you have an assistant and they never have to look bored or have nothing to do. So if you have a support staff or somebody helping out at the booth and the booth is not really busy at the time, You can send them to walk the floor and to greet visitors and to hand out leaflets during the event. We ask that people to focus. So you focus on your product, you focus on your area of specialty, and we ask you to focus also when you're at the booth, no amusing conversations with your colleagues, no reading of books or crossword puzzles, because as we said, that would be a sign that you are bored and you never want to look bored at your booth. And we ask that persons never go alone, because we know that churches can start from anywhere between 8 o'clock in the morning to even midnight. So you need to have to take a break or take a rest. So it's always appropriate to bring someone with you to help you at the booth, okay? Because at these events, although there's security, you should never leave your booth unattended. And in the case of Cuba, if you're getting somebody to go with you, if the person has a foreign language like Spanish, that would be an asset. So, and normally we say we can bring one of the a student who is studying Spanish, so that would be helpful as well. And your dress code, that's very important. So it depends on where the trade event is located. I remember we went to France, and very cold, so you need to dress appropriate, warm clothing to dress appropriately for events such as this. For Cuba, this time of year, it should be pretty warm, normal temperatures, but you still have to dress appropriately for such an event. Okay, no tight shoes, high heels, you know. You can put on your flats and so on, so that you can be comfortable. And of course, the dress also has to be appropriate in the sense that you probably have to gauge how the other people dress. Because I remember when we went to France, you know, France is a place where people really dress really well. And I know by the next day we had to find ourselves in the stores, because we realized that people dress up really well for this event. So you have to dress and gauge to see how the people dress and to follow suit. And of course, you need to get there on time. So you need to know your location, where you are located in terms of the hotel to the booth where the activity is taking place, and to get there on time so you can unpack and set up your booth and so on. So by the time these persons come around, you are already ready to receive the visitors that are coming through the event. Of course, you can have this beautiful display and everything else, but you also, as we say, one of the reasons we ask persons to dress appropriately, the people who stand in the booth also, we don't want them to look scruffy and unkept or this sort of thing. So the whole package, you have to have the whole package in terms of the booth presentation. So it's a whole overall experience. So some of the areas, as you can see from the slide, we say to avoid clutter, to be focused, and to dress appropriately. We've included an experience from Vern May, an Economic Development Officer from the Minnesota Area Community Development Corporation, on her experience as attending a trade show. So that you can review in your own time, because it's part of the presentation. I thank you. There's just one other area that I didn't mention, the follow-up, which is very important, sorry. That you will always make contacts at the event, and then you need to send emails to all the contacts that you made and thanking them for visiting your booth and so on. And if anything, provide additional information on the product and the contacts that you made. And we always say that the real work begins after the trade show, because that's where you need to do all of your follow-up, that's where you get your orders from and this sort of thing. And of course, we have a final checklist, which is your inquiry sheets, your invoices, your business cards, and you need lots of business cards, notepads, pens, sticky pads, and price lists. And if you have a portfolio, because you remember you went to an event, so you have to have some of this material. You don't want to be too bulky, but you need to have a few portfolios, and if you need to cut it down just to suit the event, that is also required. And of course, cable and power adapters, and of course literature on your product. Thank you again.
Thank you, Mrs. Joseph. At this time, I would like to invite Andrina, if she's with us today, to let us get an experience from the Trade Export Promotion Agency of St. Lucia on their participation in FIHA 2015. Andrina, are you with us? All right, Mr. Ramjatan, are you ready to go ahead?
Hello?
Yes, sir. Good morning. Are you ready to go ahead with your presentation?
Sure do.
Okay, I'll share it on the screen then.
Good, fine. Bring it up. Okay, should we share from our side?
You can. That's not a problem.
Okay.
All right, awesome.
That's it. Are you ready?
Yes.
Okay, good morning to one and all from the OECS to this webinar in doing business in Cuba. I've been asked to give Baron Foods' perspective in what lessons we have learned and we have drawn from participating in FIHAV whilst doing business in Cuba, and what are some of the challenges and opportunities. But before I get into my subject, allow me to give you a preamble. At present, the embargo which limits American businesses from conducting business in Cuba is still in effect and is the most enduring trade embargo in modern history. Despite the existing embargo, it would be surprising for you to learn that the United States is the 5th largest exporter to Cuba, and it accounts for 6.6% of Cuba's imports. Why this is so? It is because some adjustments have been made to the embargo after 1961 to allow for US exports of medical supplies and agricultural products to the island. So who accounts for the other 94% of exports to Cuba? These are China, Spain, Brazil, Mexico, Canada, and Germany. There are several other countries who export to Cuba in small quantities, with Trinidad and Jamaica leading the charge from within CARICOM in the field of cosmetics and some food items. Cuba's main exports are in the areas of citrus, coffee, tobacco, rum, and fish. But of course, not forgetting the services of its doctors in health and healthcare personnel. And who is Baron Foods? Because you would be hearing from me, and you should know something about Baron Foods. We are a company started our operations here in St. Lucia for about 25 years ago, and eventually branched out into Grenada. We export over 45% of our production in the areas of condiments, sauces, spices, and beverages to 30 countries worldwide. Yes, you have heard right, to 30 countries worldwide. We were one of the first company to have embarked on food standardization. Today, we have one of the most sought after premium standards in the world in terms of food safety, the FSSC. It opens doors once you want to export. And believe me, it does open doors into European countries and American countries. And you will see even in Cuba. Should your company be interested in exporting your goods and services to Cuba, you would need to expose your products, of course, to the general population in Cuba. And the best way to do this is by participating in the FIHAV International Fair. You have heard a little bit from previous speaker what the FIHAV is. The dates are usually set around fixed time of the year. That is between October to the first week of November. The venue is always on the Expo Cuba Fairgrounds in Havana. The fair targets business industries to include agricultural goods and its related machineries, processed foods, building products, and other consumable items. A previous speaker mentioned 5 benefits, but participating in FIHAV for over 5 years, I would like to outline the 10 most important. 5 was good, but then I found there were 10 because we participated consistently for over 5 years. The benefits you will obtain are as follows. Expose your products and services to selective audience. You will increase the visibility of your products by tastings and some real-time exposure. You will have the opportunity to compare your products with competitive products who are already in the markets. Insights and market intelligence, which will be of vital importance to your company. You will develop a first-hand understanding of the opportunities and the challenges of doing business in Cuba. Participating in network events, as well as pre-organized business-to-business meeting set up by your respective embassies and Ministry of Trade in Havana. You would understand the labeling legislation in Spanish, which you will of course need in due course. You would meet key personnel of the commercial entities from the respective companies responsible for purchasing your goods in Cuba. There are only 4, and later on I will outline these 4 to you. You would be meeting executive personnel from the Chamber of Commerce, who will remain your permanent link of doing business in Cuba. This is of vital importance. And 10th, it will allow you to meet and expose your products to other distributors from other parts of the world who are also participating at FIHAV. From there, we have exported goods to Cuba, we have exported goods to Germany, and we have exported goods to Venezuela, because these companies are always present in FIHAV. From the slide there, you will see myself exposing a full range of our condiments, sauces, and beverages. And next to that, you will see 3 other companies who have participated along with me in this process. So, by participating continuously, you will have an opportunity to eventually meet the personnel responsible for purchasing your goods from the 4 companies who are responsible for importing most of your goods. And these companies are CEMEX, Palco Centro, TRD Carib, and ITH Enterprises. Believe me, you have to try and make contact with these 4 companies. And as I said, it will be done, and it can be done through the Chamber of Commerce, through your Ministry of Trade, through your embassy in Cuba, and through your local export-led organization, which these companies must be by your side at all times. I want to reiterate, you cannot do it alone. Cuba is very, very bureaucratic. After you have participated in these continuous trade shows at FIHAV, you will eventually get a company to distribute your goods in Cuba. There is where the new set of protocols would be needed. So after you get this, you will find that this company who is distributing your goods in Cuba would demand, not even request. And if you can't satisfy these demands, it means you will do yourself an injustice. And there are several demands that the Cuban government, remember, it's not no private enterprise who would be importing your goods. These companies that I just mentioned, they are arms of the government, right? And they will request these following documents from you, and you must have it. One, a letter from the bank confirming that you are in good financial standing. Yes, you've heard right. And you're capable of granting to the company in Cuba a minimum of 90 days credit facilities. They usually negotiate for 6 months. The minimum you can break them down to is 90 days. Secondly, they would request a letter from your Inland Revenue Department confirming that your company's income tax obligation is up to date. Number three, they would need a certificate of free sale from the Bureau of Standard in your respective country. And I'm putting up these documents to see, and if you look at them, you're going to see the dates. So they are not fabricated documents. These are documents that I had to submit. It would be a no-no. Number four, a document from your customs department outlining the tariff number for the goods you intend to export to Cuba. They would need your goods to be sent to Cuba to be analyzed by their laboratory in Cuba. You will see the document on the left there, and you would see the name of the institution of the laboratory that you have to send your goods to. These are information you would not get from any and every company. I am indeed happy to share it with you. So your goods, once it's food, it has to be sent to this laboratory, and they will have to test it, and then you will have to pay to get it tested there. Then you will have to send your standard certificate. You would see that our company has the FSSC food safety system, as, which is 2000. So if you don't have one, you have to get your house in order to ensure you have the minimum HACCP. This is, of course, way above HACCP. They will need your memorandum and articles of association. That is to show that, listen, you have incorporated within your island state and you're not a fly-by-night company. They would need to see from your public health ministry your license to operate. You would see that on the right there. And this is a certificate issued by your Ministry of Health on a yearly basis after the Ministry of Health personnel come and visit your company. So they want to ensure that the goods that you're exporting to Cuba is sound and safe, and all third-party audit is in place. So they have a way of checking without they coming. They would need the technical information for all your products. Apart from giving them the ingredients on your label, you would see on these documents here, they would need all the technical specification. This is to verify whether you have been using allergens. This is to verify you have been using, say, food colors, which is carcinogenic. So they want to ensure that, listen, all the ingredients that you have in your products, they want to know the technical information on that. After that, you have submitted these documents, they would, of course, verify and get back to you. This process, believe me, would take another 2 years probably, if you have the active participation of your local ministry, the embassy, and as I said, your export-led company in your island. In our case, is TIPA. They have to hold your hands. They have to shepherd you. Because, as I said before, Cuba is very bureaucratic. You would find the process very, very tedious. But as I said before, the population is over 9 million. The population is starved for Caribbean goods because they are exposed mostly to European goods who are trading with them, goods from China and so. And these are Caribbean people, and they want our goods and service. But the way they do business is not traditional as we have accustomed to do business. After we have successfully did and provide all the documentation needed and they have approved them, they would invite you back to Cuba to launch your products. This entails, of course, it's an expensive continuation exercise. In my case, I took a chef from Cuba, along with the key personnel of TIPA and the ministry and the embassy. I embarked on an exercise to teach and to show the Cubans, a selective, invited crowd, to understand my full range of products, what it entails, how it's prepared, and how our goods can cook their cuisine. Believe me, it's a beautiful exercise. Yes, it costs money, but it can be done. And they're expecting it to be done too. You can't get away because they tick along as you go. There is no escape route to trade with Cuba. To conduct business in Cuba, so far, there is one bank which has been doing business in Cuba. Yes, we have Scotia, we have other bank, but the bank which has been doing business and which I would recommend is the Republic Bank from Trinidad. It is expected that you will sell them your goods through a letter of credit, which you can open with the Republic Bank here. Shipping your goods. Once you're shipping your goods through ocean freight, you can do it with Kajima, CMA, CGM, or you can do it with Tropical. Mind you, I'm not using no American. There is no American route to Cuba immediate right now. And there are two airlines, the Copa, which travels through Trinidad, Panama into Cuba, or you can ship your goods through the European. Imagine, through the European, yes, Virgin Atlantic would accept your goods in the Caribbean, take it all the way to Europe, and then transship it into Cuba. But believe me, it takes 24 hours. It can reach there before you reach. If you ship your goods through Virgin Atlantic, it can reach to Cuba before you have reached, leaving your destination here in the OECS. What I have done there for you is 5 years. I have summarized and give you the facts. You don't want to hear what I have done over the 5 years. And the information I have given you there, it is the facts, it is the long route I have taken and I've presented to you in about 10 to 15 minutes. And believe me, you have to follow these. All the best and thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Ramjatan. This was invaluable. They could pay you for that. It has definitely showed us the experience that is needed, and continuously for 5 years you have pursued. And I heard good reviews about the tasting last year. So
thank you.
Yeah, that was definitely a priceless presentation. We really appreciate it a whole lot. Let me see if Tipa is ready to give their presentation. Andrina, are you there?
I speak in my head.
Okay. Well, we're going to move on to our esteemed ambassador from Cuba, responsible for Dominica, Saint Dominica of the last 2 years.
Yeah.
Yes. He has been listening intently, and he's definitely going to give us some feedback on the Cuban markets associated with how we can, make it easier for us to get into the market in light of the agreements that we signed with Cuba. Thank you, Mr. Ambassador.
Yes, thank you. So, good morning to everyone. First of all, I would like to thank to OECS CBU to invite me to this conference. My friend Robert, he told me some days ago to prepare Fiat remarks or Fiat conference. But I was listening carefully the former presentation, so I don't have nothing to add. So you have more information than me about Fiat, and especially the presentation with Ms. Darin and the last one, Mr. Ranjatan. So I don't have anything else to say, but I would like to helpful tips. So I want to remind something that because Ranjatan was talking about the U.S. embargo to Cuba. It's important to know that because the embargo, you cannot use credit card or debit card issued in U.S. banks in Cuba. So you cannot use it. And also, U.S. penalized Cuba 10%. Compared with another foreign currency. That's why we recommend traveling to Cuba with another currency like Canadian dollars, euro, pounds, in order to avoid this penalty. But I want to focus my intervention in what way we can increase the relationship between Cuba and OECS. Of course, I don't have a crystal ball in front of me, so I will give you my experience, my personal understanding. So I think that it could be important to have a mutual understanding of the parties. That means what I can sell and what I can buy from Cuba or from the OECS. Mr. Ranjatan said that we are bureaucratic. I agree in some way with him. But we need to know the characteristics of the Cuban market and knowing the market of Eastern Caribbean. So we are talking about Cuban market, so it's 11 million persons with OECS market, we are talking about almost 600,000 persons. So we need to know in what condition Cuba has been working. What means the embargo? We cannot use American dollars. Even when we have, when we establish diplomatic relations with U.S., we have embassy in Washington and U.S. has embassy in Havana. Despite the visit of Obama this year, and also he said that Cuba can use American dollars, we cannot do it. So we have now this problem. So the OECS cannot pay the stamp in fiat, so cannot make a transaction, bank transaction, because the embargo. And you have to see all these difficulties are affecting our relationship with other countries. I think that we should evaluate the signing of a memorandum of understanding in order to create a legal framework to evaluate, to discuss about the possibility between Cuba and OECD members. The participation the participation in the fiat is one part of, in order to promote bilateral ties, meeting. We need to promote meetings between Cuban businessmen and OECS businessmen. We need to send business mission to Cuba, and we need to, Cuba needs to send a mission, business mission to OECS. We need to identify what problems are hidden the development of trade links. I will give you one example. It's easier to fly from, let us say, Dominica to London than from Dominica to Havana. And the distance is, so we are closest from Havana. So we have to fly from Dominica to Trinidad or to San Martin, and then from there to Panama, and then from Panama to Havana. Why we cannot think in one LIA flight to Santiago de Cuba, for instance? Now we are flying, we have a Cubana flight from Havana to Martinique, and Martinique is an OECS member. So we need to know the problem that we have in order to increase our relationship. And of course, we need a political will of the party in order to develop the trade relation. So I think that we have, in both sides, the political will in order to move forward our relationship. We need to bring the trade relation to the same, we need to bring the trade relation to the same level of political relation between Cuba and OECS. So the political relation is in the top, and we have to bring the trade relation to the top. So I think that we are in a good way. We need to talk, we need to discuss more, we need to exchange more opinion in order to increase finally the relationship between Cuba and OECS. I thank you.
Thank you so much, Ambassador. Andrea from TIPA, you're up next.
Okay, I'm ready. Can you hear me, everybody?
Yes, we can.
Okay, hi, I'm Andrina Simon. I'm Promotion and Marketing Officer from the Signature Trade Export Promotion Agency. First of all, I'd like to thank Mr. Ramjatan for the presentation, and we are very, very, very proud of what he's been able to achieve, and that he is willing to actually share the information with everyone. Thank you very much, Mr. Ramjatan. I wanted to give you a little background as to on our approach, how we pursue the Cuban market. For us, despite the continuous difficulties, we thought that local businesses had when trading with Cuba, we were very persistent to pursue opportunities. And for us, we wanted to be able to actually, how would I say, have a strategic approach as to how we were going to actually investigate and look at the market. So I think 3 years ago, we have been working with Mr. Ramjitam over, I think, a little over 3 years. And 3 years ago, we thought, okay, let us first start by participating in FEHAB, but also putting in place a number of strategic activities to be able to get to the right persons to start a conversation on export. So we developed a number of objectives for our participation that included obtaining first-hand information on the extent on which the business environment in Cuba improved, identifying emerging opportunities, establishing linkages with key stakeholders and government officials, and so forth. But we also decided to not go with a whole contingent of exporters. We wanted to take that one exporter as a test case, because for us, in order to gain a practical understanding of doing business in Cuba, we wanted to use that one exporter to create a path, a route to export for other exporters. So we use Barron Food as a test case, and to date, you can all see he has been able to penetrate the market. Now, I must say to everyone, especially the exporters in this meeting, investing in Cuba is an investment. And I think Mr. Ramjitan have already explained that it takes a lot of time and patience. Nothing happens immediately. And we had to be very persistent and patient actually to even be to achieve what we were able to with Barron Foods. From a TPO point of view, it is very important that the TPOs work with their local representatives on the ground. Cuba is a very bureaucratic environment. And once you go through the correct channels, you are able to achieve a lot. We use our local representative on the ground to lead. After participating in FEHAB, we had already, how would I say, we had already gotten very viable leads for Barron Foods. So to build on those leads, we worked with our representative on the ground to liaise with the potential buyers. He networked with them, he had meetings with them. We used him when it comes to assisting Barron with the testing and the analysis of the products. We used him when it came to assisting Barron with the contract negotiations. But everything was channeled through TPA and through our embassy. That is very, very, very important. If you go as an exporter directly, it will probably take maybe double the time that it took us, and also will be very challenging for you. Another thing that we did was, after attending FEHAB the very first time, we were very fortunate through our ambassador to actually meet with all the key stakeholders in Cuba. We met with the Chamber of Commerce, we met with Pro-Cuba, we met with a number of buyers, CMEX, TRD, a number of them. We had B2B meetings set up for us prior to that, and we were fortunate to have them just walk into our booth during FEHAB. Okay, so Mr. Ramjatana did that point, he did some presentations and they were very impressed. So we had to be very, very quick in following up leads. Once we returned to St. Lucia, we had to stay on top of it. Okay, and one of the things we did as well is we actually signed a memorandum of understanding with Pro-Cuba. So we actually have a St. Lucia and Cuba MOU agreement that have a list of activities that falls under the agreement. And included in that is we wanted a way to channel more exporters into what we call our Cuba program, that is building on the experiences of Barron Foods. So to date, we have worked with Barron Foods, and now we have 6 other exporters that we are currently working through the same channels that we put Barron Foods through to be able to achieve some kind of market penetration for them. So the Memorandum of Understanding between St. Lucia and Cuba is very important for us because included in that are activities that lead to some sort of market penetration. Another thing that was pointed out to us from inception, if you're going to be doing business with Cuba, you have to participate in FIHAV. Okay, and I think Mr. Ramjatan already indicated how many years he actually did FIHAV. So it is kind of a requirement. And also from a TPO point of view, how would I say, looking for any possible opportunity to liaise and network with the Cuban officials is very important. And we always try to capitalize on any occasion. We had Cuban officials who visited St. Lucia to go to the embassy in St. Lucia. We actually had meetings with them just to give them a presentation of the exporters we had included in our Cuba program, and just an introduction to the products and the company, just any opportunity to showcase how to promote your products and services in front of the Cuban officials is very, very important. I think most of it already from an exporter's point of view, Mr. Ramjatan covered it. But again, I would like to stress the importance of working with your local representatives on the ground, as well as having the patience to actually pursue the market, because it is very time consuming, but it is very rewarding. Cuba is a very large market. And once you get in, I think it's a great thing. I think that I've covered it all. If you may have any questions, please feel free to ask.
Thank you, Andrina.
You're welcome.
This leads us into the open discussion and question and answer session. You can also use the chat window to ask your questions. You can use the raise your hand feature as well in there, so we can tackle it in an orderly manner. Or you can just ask the questions and then you can direct them to any of the ambassador, Mr. Ramjatan or Ms. Simon or us as needed, as can be answered by the people in here. So the first question, any questions? I'll check the chat window. But anybody who are free to unmute their mic and start asking their questions now, one at a time.
I'm wondering, as a CARICOM group, how do we get the passes to participate in FIHAV? Will they be given something special to know that we can participate from CARICOM?
Can you repeat that, please, Director of Trade?
Sorry, OECS? Okay. I want to know if from OECS will be given a pass, as in a special pass to get the Expo Cuba. I was studying in Cuba before, and I know the facility is very, very big. So we'll be given a special pass from the OECS as a group to be recognized as a participant in the show.
Hi, Kwesi Roberts here. OECS will be having a booth at the FIHAV 2016. If I understand, you are asking if OECS companies will be participating.
No.
You're asking about a pass.
Yes.
Okay. There is an accreditation process or registration for the participants the FIHAB. So once you are there at the time of registration, then you should be able to receive the accreditation. There is a number of accreditation badges that will be provided. Can't remember the exact number now for the booths that have been booked for the OECS delegation.
Okay. Lillian Piper, you want to go ahead?
I have a question from Mr. Ramjatan from St. Lucia. Are you there, sir?
Can you speak a little louder?
Okay. Can you hear my mic?
Yes, we hear you better now.
Okay. I have a question for Mr. Ramjatan from Barron Foods in St. Lucia. Is he there?
Yes, he is. Just go ahead and ask your question.
Okay. Mr. Ramjatan, I just want to know, in terms of some of the difficulties of doing business in Cuba, for example, the currency exchange, or in terms of shipping and so on and so forth, did you have to internalize those difficulties or those costs of doing business in the pricing of your goods? Did you find that there was a reduction in your profits? I'm sorry, I know it's a large market and obviously profitable, but I'm just wondering, in terms of costs or looking at going into Cuba and considering buying, importing from a manufacturer in Cuba, would there be some change in costs or reduction in profitability because of that?
Good question, and you will be surprised to hear the answer. The Cuban government does not negotiate with your prices. They negotiate on credit terms, and they don't even ask you for a CIF price. They are only interested in a FOB price, which is freight on board, and they will pay their own freight. They do not negotiate, or at least they have not negotiated with me in terms of price. They are very strong in negotiating the time period to pay. And that being said, they do not want an open credit terms, which is good, because they want a letter of credit, whether it's 180 days, 1 year, 90 days, set up through a bank. And once a letter of credit is set up through a bank, it means good news for you. And we have not negotiated on the prices, so I offered them, because it's Cuba and because I knew in anticipation that the volume would have been good, yes, a competitive price. And this competitive price is in keeping what I offer other volume markets like the United States, Canada, and Europe. I hope that answers your question.
Yes, yes, that answers my question. Thank you very much.
Any other questions?
Yes, I have a question.
Go ahead.
I think following what Mr. Ramjatan just said, I think one of the big concerns is the fact that a lot of our exporters, at least smaller exporters, would normally bank with a lot of the indigenous banks in the OECS, and they don't handle or understand trade finance. So I know Scotiabank is the only one that also has a presence in Cuba. And you mentioned Republic Bank, but not all the islands have Republic Bank. So in terms of, if you're saying that they only negotiate based on credit terms, then how do we kind of get around that?
The first thing why I didn't say the other banks, even the Canadian banks, because these Canadian banks have their intermediary bank in Wall Street in the United States.
Yeah.
And as you know, the embargo is on anything American. So the Canadian banks even cannot handle that. I don't know how they handle it from Canada, but Canada straight to Cuba, yes. But we here have to go through, once you're channeling your business through Nova Scotia or any other Canadian bank, you will be forced to go through an intermediary bank, which is in Wall Street. So that is a no-no. Cash, I can't say, because the company that negotiated with me did not, and I did not, because I didn't want to even go through a route through cash or any other monetary instruments. I was happy when they mentioned the letter of credit, and it's irrevocable too, which is good, through the bank. So it means the Cubans are conducting their business in a very fiscal and responsible way. It's just that the process is very tedious. So you have to understand that, listen, Cuba does not do business the regular way that we are doing, but it's a good way, long and tedious. So with me, I understand, because I'm exporting, as I said, to over 30 countries. We do all kinds of facilitations. So it was not difficult for me. It was just tedious to get them to arrive at the point where I say here, 90 days, no, and not 180 days, no, not 360 days. But it's just to get them to that point, and they don't want to budge from 90 days neither. And I was glad when they said letter of credit. They didn't say, okay, ship them an open account. I would have been a little bit, kind of, my hairs would have been raising up if they had said ship them open account and hold them responsible to pay me afterwards. But they didn't say no. So I kind of like it. It's just that it's challenging, it's tedious, as I said.
Okay, thank you. And then my other question, I think it more relates to trade and services, because while we've been talking about goods, I don't know what the experience is in terms of trading services, because with trading services, you don't really use trade finance mechanisms. I don't know if anybody could answer that. I don't know if Tipa has an experience with anybody.
To be honest, we have not actually gone that route yet. I can tell you though, under our MOU that we signed, we do have some activities where we are exploring with ProCuba for opportunities for persons like the architects and those that actually studied in Cuba and have the language capabilities. The biggest problem with that is the language capabilities. So we looked at things like the architects, the medical persons that studied in Cuba. Those are the areas that we are going. We are actually targeting for trading services where Cuba is concerned. And some of the activities we outlined would include like exchange programs for persons to actually, for some capacity building, technical and capacity building skills for them. Also getting persons from Cuba to come over to St. Lucia to actually conduct some training or provide some type of capacity building in St. Lucia in itself. So these are the areas. We also talked about exchange programs where you would probably have a service provider work in Cuba for a few months, and Cuba service provider coming over to St. Lucia to work for a few months along these areas, because it's a relatively new thing for us as well, where services is concerned, with the major barrier being the language.
Thank you.
Madam Moderator, from my end, I also want to indicate to the delegate from St. Kitts and Nevis that I indicated earlier that whilst the agreement, the Trade and Economic Cooperation Agreement, does provide for negotiations for services, that has not happened. That discussion started very minimally in 2015 between Cuba and CARICOM. I also on my end don't have any practical information regarding persons from the OECS who have succeeded in services areas in the Cuban market. So the information on my end is limited in respect of whether discussions would have happened thus far.
Thank you.
Are there any more questions from anybody else?
The other question is, if you, outside of FEHAV, if you want to plan, say, an educational exchange or educational activity in Cuba, and it involves participation of persons from other countries, because right now I export services, and I have an accelerator program, and I do some remote acceleration programs in different countries. So one of the countries I'm thinking about doing it is in Cuba, but then again, the persons who will be coming to Cuba will not only be from the region, but will be from the US. So I'm very interested in, with the new relation, and this I think is for the ambassador, with the new, should I say, cooperation with the US. I think right now I'm trying to grapple with what are the requirements for persons from the US in terms of entry, whether it's visas or whatever. What are the requirements for persons coming from the US into Cuba? Because I think that is where I'm getting a sticking point. I know for us in the OECS, we could travel and I guess pay the tourist visa, but it would seem as though for the US, they have to get special permission. And if I am an OECS company actually conducting this activity, how can I get whatever approvals for them to participate in my event?
Yes. First of all, American citizens cannot go for free to Cuba because the embargo. So they need a special license or special permission from the State Department to go to Cuba. So now they have 12 permission, I mean 12 kind of permission, let us say. So it means export, educational exchange, cultural exchange, difference. So taking this license, they can go to Cuba, but they cannot go for free to Cuba.
So I would have to, as a company, apply to the US State Department and indicate that I am doing an educational activity, and then they would have to get the license. Okay.
That's right.
Thank you for your clarification.
Any more questions, concerns, comments?
One thing I would just like to add, and I think I missed out on, in terms of the language barrier, don't be scared. Don't be scared, because there are lots of university students available to give their services to every company at nominal prices. They are very much experienced, they are well dressed, and they are incentives to your booth.
Very helpful, Mr. Ramjitan.
I have a question.
Go ahead, Dr. Cox.
Hi. Ronald, with the shipment that you sent to Cuba, did they impose any import duties on it, or was it duty-free because of the CARICOM agreement?
The goods to Cuba is just would be subjected to whatever their taxes, no duties. Because I think when you listen to the agreement that CARICOM has with them, the taxes are not there, but they are just like how we pay VAT, your goods would be subjected to that landed tax. No extra duties and so.
Right.
Once it's within the scope of the CARICOM agreement, if your list of items falls within the scope.
Okay, thanks.
Welcome. Anybody else? You guys have given us 2 hours of your time, and I hope it's been beneficial. Before we do closing remarks, feel free to contact us at the Information Center at the OECS. We work with, along with the other agencies like TIPA and CARICOM, that we also source for information and that can help us with the process. So if you have any other questions that you don't want to address at this point, I would ask Kwesi to just give some closing remarks and we can bring an end to this webinar.
Thanks. Thanks, Darren. Let me say thank you very much to the presenters, everyone, for a wonderful job. So first off, let me thank Ambassador, His Excellency, Juan Carlos.
Carlos is enough.
Thank you for your time, and thank you for giving us some insight into the strategies that can be used for building relationships and deepening the integration between ourselves and Cuba as a OECS and Cuba, and for doing business with Cuba. Thank you very much to our presenter, Mr. Ronald Ramjatan, from the CEO of Baron Foods. Thank you very much for outlining clearly and very direct and specific way the strategies that you utilized for entering the Cuban market, for doing business in Cuba. I think that information is very useful, and we are happy that you are able to share the information with the companies of the OECS and with the participants of the webinar. We do look forward to the companies being able to utilize these strategies or similar strategies and to take a similar approach and to be patient and working towards entering the Cuban market. We're also like to say thanks to Ms. Simon from TIPA for also presenting and for giving an overview of the work that TIPA has done to actually get into the OECS market. Just to recap some of the presentations that we had generally, we had a snapshot of the CARICOM-Cuba agreement presented by Dolores Francis at the Trade Policy Unit of the OECS Commission, which outlined basically the agreement with Cuba and CARICOM and the status of the agreement, also the articles within the agreement and the goods that are covered under the agreement. Ms. Darren Grell really highlighted for us what the FIHAV Expo is about and what opportunities can be gained from FIHAV. Also, Ms. Pearl Joseph highlighted for us what steps should be taken in preparing to participate in the trade show. Generally, I think the session was very useful. I'm happy that we are able to successfully have this interaction and that we had participation from all of the member states, and that I think the information provided will be very useful in the OECS strategy in going forward and building relations with Cuba as well as entering the Cuban market. I'd like to say thanks to everyone for participating, for coming and being a part of the activity. Thanks to all of the OECS staff as well for your intervention and for participating in the activity as well. And to all those who have logged on from the region, we say special thank you. And we look forward to collaboration and further working relationships in the future. Thank you very much on behalf of the OECS CBU.